A facility contract terminated before you start or soon thereafter. This is happening more and more, everybody. Hey, it's John with Contract Diagnostics, and we're getting emails from some of our clients that they've had a change in their employment, but they haven't even started yet, or maybe they just started. So a lot of times, of course, you sign a contract, not with the hospital, but with an entity that has a contract with the hospital. So these layover companies employ physicians and have a contract with the hospital to provide the services to the facility. And they work out well. In a lot of situations, there's been some negative press on them, but for the most part, it works out well. The hospital and the facility is more efficient. These organizations are ways that physicians can get jobs, even transfer from state to state depending on the size of the organization, and consolidate some of the care. But they don't have those contracts forever and ever. So a hospital typically signs a contract with one of these entities, and it might be a 3-year contract, it might be a 5-year contract, maybe it's a little bit longer. And these contracts have an end date. Now they might be renewed, they might be rebid by them or other organizations. This company may be having issues with who their contracting team is. Maybe they're overcharging and somebody else can do it for less. Maybe they are in the press and they're not looked at kindly by the news outlets and by the facility that has the contract. So it's always vital when you're negotiating with one of these employers to figure out how long that contract is valid for. When the last time it changed hands? Did the hospital reach out for RFPs, or did they just extend it to the organization for another term? Is it auto-renewing? Is there a no-cause termination in there by both parties? And if so, what's that notice? And how would they handle a situation like that, whether it happened before or after you started working? Of course, because if there's no facility, they don't have a contract. Would they reassign all the physicians they have? Would they terminate everybody? Would they buy out the non-compete and allow you to stay at the facility? Or would they force you to repay your signing bonuses? All these things are very important information. And we do get messages and emails from some of our clients that have signed one of these contracts and they're notified, oh, by the way, we might not need you because we don't have this contract anymore. Or I just took an email from somebody the other day where they had started working, they'd worked there for 6 weeks, and they were notified that the facility lost the contract, and people were being sent letters on how the transition process is going to work. Now, thankfully, the clients that we work with know how to negotiate these. So we know that we want to find out when these contracts expire, and that's not something that a physician can control. You can't say, I demand it to be extended or I demand it to be a certain way, but it's important to understand how long these contracts are in place and what happens if and when the contract goes away. But those are things that are completely out of the physician's control. So what is? Well, how the contract is structured. Do you have a 90-day no-cause termination if the facility assigns your contract to somebody else, and can they do those things? So most of the time, contracts have assignability clauses in them, which means that if they lose the contract, your contract might be looked at as an asset and they would assign it to the new organization, depending on if it's a merger, acquisition, or just a loss of contract. If it's a loss of contract, you might be out of a job. So what kind of notice do they need to give you? And will they allow you to keep working? Will they not? Will they pay you a bonus or not? All things that are put in an employment contract that you should make sure that you have drafted in your favor. So if you are terminated with 90 days notice, and that happens, it's in 97% of contracts, a no-cause termination, oftentimes facilities will just say, we don't, and the contract will specify that you may or may not be required to work the 90 days, but will you get paid for the 90 days? Now, some contracts you only get paid for shifts worked or hours on the clock. So, do you receive compensation for those 90 days if you didn't work, if you didn't clock in? Do you have control over that? Should be in the contract that no matter what they choose, if they don't let you work those 90 days, they will pay you for what you would have earned throughout those 90 days. If there's a bonus earned, of course, it should be prorated to your last day termination and paid in every single situation regarding termination. I'm okay if it's a physician being fired or terminated with cause that you don't receive these things, and I would tell a physician, be a good steward and don't get fired. But if the contract goes away, it's important to understand how you'll be paid and how you'll transition. Okay, number one. Number two, it's important to understand what will happen to a non-compete. Does a non-compete go away if they lose their facility contract, meaning you could just stay and apply for a new job with a new entity or not? Are dollars repaid if there's a signing bonus and they give it to you all up front or over time and you're repaying it, so to speak, with your years of service over 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years? Well, if the contract ends prior to that, you have to pay the money back. Again, that should be clearly drafted that in any situation you do not have to pay it back. Maybe they want to say if you show up and you quit inside of 2 months or 3 months or even a year that you have to pay some back, and I'm okay with that. I would say choose wisely the position you take, especially if they're giving you dollars and money up front. We also need to make sure that we know what happens with malpractice insurance. Is it covered? Is it not covered? We also need to know how they're going to inform you and what the timelines will be. A lot of the things are out of your control in these situations. We can't control when the contract ends. We can't control if they lose it or not. We can't control, any of these things. All we can control is how the contract is put together and what the physician knows and understands about if there's a transition for any particular reason. So maybe you do have different clauses for if you quit, the contract ends, of course, and there's a transition process. Maybe you do have to buy your tail insurance, or you do have to pay the money back, or you maybe won't be allowed to work those 90 days. And if it's on you, then I may be a little bit okay with that if you're the reason, because you're making the decision to terminate without cause. Now, if the facility is responsible because they lost the contract, they terminate without cause, you terminate for cause, or they don't renew the agreement or renew it at a market appropriate rate, then I think there should be no harm, no damage to the physician or their family. So how these things are negotiated up front really matters. And oftentimes a physician will sign a contract a year out of training thinking, it's just my first job, I don't need to have it looked at, I'm only going to be here for a few short years and then I'm going to transition to my real job. That's when I'll invest and have a contract reviewed. I would say don't do that because these things are very important and it could mean a lot of money on the table. Maybe they call you back 2 months before your job search and you can't start working because they lost the contract. Now you got to find a new job, interview, get a contract, may or may not review it, get credentialed, maybe even a new state license, and start, and you're going to have a gap in income. Maybe you start working for 2 months, they terminate you without cause and say, don't even worry about coming back because we can accelerate your termination, and you don't get paid. Now we got to pay back a signing bonus. Now we don't get paid, and rents still due, and we got to go out there and find a job, and it might not be easy for a physician to find a job as quick as another craft like a barista or a construction worker. So I say all these things because they're very, very important. And facilities and hospital contracts are shifting hands all the time. So if you are one of the specialties that tends to work under one of these facility contracts, not a hospital contract, know and understand the nuances with them. Know that there is a little bit more risk, but that's okay as long as you understand the risk. I'm John at Contract Diagnostics. If we can help you understand any risk or needs or compensation demands or anything else, give us a call. We're always here. You can email us at info@contractdiagnostics anytime.